Great. So, Sir Ronald, you are live in front of XPANSE in Abu Dhabi. How are you? Okay, guys, we just need to get Sir Ronald's microphone working. I may have to move this chair.
And do I get to see you? Mike?
Right. Can you just say something and say hello?
Yeah, I can speak. I don't hear you very loudly, even though I have you on maximum.
Marvelous. We can hear you. Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Obviously, it's a virtual fireside chat with Sir Ronald Cohen. Sir Ronald Cohen is president of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, GSG, the Portland Trust, and the recently created International Foundation for Valuing Impacts, which is for those of you who don't know, Sir Ronald's been described as the founder of UK venture capital, having founded Apex Capital, as well as a key leader in the impact investment space. It's an absolute pleasure, although unfortunately it is virtual, but it's very much my pleasure to meet you. Perhaps if we could start with, go back to your beginnings. You have arrived in the UK from the Middle East and your father took your family and arrived from the Middle East with only £10 in his pocket, I gather. That must have been an amazing story.
Well, it was a very difficult time for my parents, although they shielded me and my brother from the challenges they faced. But they had this ability to present everything as a positive challenge. And so it's not until I went to university that I realized just how challenging leaving Egypt in the early 40s, coming to London with completely different weather, as you can imagine, and no money would involve. But fortunately, it all worked out.
Well, yes, from these very, very humble beginnings, you won a scholarship to Oxford University. And you really, from such a humble beginning, arriving in the UK effectively with nothing, you got to a scholarship to Oxford University, one of the most prestigious universities in the UK and indeed the world. And you, in fact, became president of the Oxford Union, which is really quite an amazing achievement. I'm very interested in how that's been reflected in your career since, because really what you've become known for is impact investing. So investing for real impact in the world, which is for the social good, the environmental good, the good of society overall. How is education effectively built into your philosophy?
Well, so Mike, it is Mike interviewing me because I can't
It's correct,
see you,
Mike Butcher.
Right. Nice.
From TechCrunch.
Nice to be sharing this conversation, Mike. Listen, I owe it all to a teacher called Richard Farley, who was recruited by a new headmaster in a school that had a very patchy academic record. And he said to me when I was about 13 years old, Cohen, you should go to Oxford. I said, well, how am I going to get to Oxford from Orange Hill Grammar School, which has never sent anyone to Oxford before? And he said, I'll coach you for the entrance exams. And thanks to Richard Farley, as you say, I not only got in, but got a scholarship. I've been helped in my life. I was welcomed to the UK with open arms, I can say. My education was paid for by the government. Richard Farley, bless him. By the way, I tracked him down 40 years after I left school and continued to see him over a period of 7 or 8 years. Richard Farley, bless him, helped me. It gave me a sense that I have an obligation to do the same for others. And I must say that my home, my parents, always had this philosophy, which is widespread in the Middle East among Jews and Muslims and Christians, that if you're lucky enough to have a good life and to do well, then you have an obligation to help others.
Well, absolutely, and so clearly your philosophy is informed how you've operated in business and in investment. But obviously, following your graduation, you started a career in management consultancy for McKinsey, and then during that time, you realized clearly that there was an opportunity for venture capital in the UK. And in 1972, you founded Apax Partners, which then went on to become one of the biggest global leaders in private equity and venture capital. But what I'd like to know is, what were the challenges then convincing people that this was going to be one of the industries of the future?
Well, it's very much like the challenge we face now with impact, Mike. When you see a new field coming, only a minority understands that it is really coming. And the majority hangs on to the status quo and looks backwards. In the early days, 1972, when I kicked off at the age of 26 and a bit, it was thought that entrepreneurs only existed in the United States, that they didn't exist in Europe, that if you failed in Europe, you'd be kept down, whereas in the United States, you'd brush the dust off your knees and people would help you to get going again, and that venture capital would never succeed. The way we succeeded was to keep proving that there were entrepreneurs that were capable of doing things that big companies were unable to do. This was the thing that I saw when I was at Harvard Business School as a student, before I worked for McKinsey for a couple of years, that young people with innovative ideas are capable of overtaking the big, established 100-year-old companies that led many industries, including the computer industry. IBM at the time was a huge, dominant leader. Well, I felt differently. I felt that if you need to innovate, then being small and nimble and open-minded and not a prisoner of the thinking that had made you successful in the past, but an owner of a vision and an approach that can enable you to be successful in the future. And that's exactly why you see Microsoft and Apple overtaking IBM by leagues. And today, the same is true of impact investment. A minority of people realize that it's going to transform our economic system and our financial system in the same way that venture capital and technology and private equity have helped to do.
Do you still feel that it's the case that small, nimble companies can go after much larger ones, or do you feel that it's much harder these days, or do you think it's still the same?
Look at Amazon and Tesla. I mean, these two companies are less than 30 years old, and they become the mammoth leaders in their sector. Tesla got going around 2000. And the interesting thing about Tesla is it's the first company which brought impact into its business model, into its product. The first customers of Tesla, I remember, were people who were attracted to the idea of not polluting the environment. Sure, the car looked sleek and they hoped it would perform well, but it got going because it was optimizing, in my terms, risk, return, and impact. And that's the way of the future. If you're investing today, or if you're an entrepreneur, if your business is only optimizing risk return, there are others who are going to overtake you by optimizing risk return and impact. They're going to grow faster, they're going to be more profitable, They're going to attract more talent than companies and investment portfolios that only optimize risk and return.
Yes, I see. Famously, of course, Tesla is also known for being quite anti-unions. Do you think that unionization falls under a positive for society in terms of impact investing?
So I think Tesla is an example of bringing the environmental dimension into your product. I'm not saying that Elon Musk or every one of Tesla's policies are a paragon to follow for impact investors. To your question about unions, there's no doubt that our capitalist system creates economic and social gaps that are too great for the cohesion of our society. We see it everywhere across the world. We see a clash between capitalism and democracy. We see that they both share a common platform of freedom to compete in your area of business, within the ambit of the law, freedom to live your life within the ambit of the law as you see fit. But they conflict when it comes to the distribution of the gain. And impact investment brings with it impact measurement. Impact measurement brings transparency on the social impacts that companies create. And the International Foundation for Valuing Impacts, which I chair, has now published data sets for environmental and social impacts that represent the arrival of impact accounting. If you begin to expose differences in pay within a company or relative to its competitors, according to gender, according to ethnicity, if you compare them with the living wage, if you compare them with the minimum wage, if you compare them with the average wage in the sector, investors will begin to right some of the wrongs that risk return optimization lead our system to create. The same is true for the environment. If you expose all the environmental damage caused by a company in monetary terms, the social was in monetary terms too. If you expose that, then you can begin to compare impacts and profits, and you can begin to relate the improvement in impact performance of a company with the improvement in its profitability and its growth.
I'm glad you brought that up because I know that you're very much a prime mover behind the recently created International Foundation for Valuing Impacts. And I think today's entrepreneur is now aware of the idea that what they're creating, whatever it is, will have to answer for, certainly for environmental impact these days because it's such a big issue around the climate crisis. And there is also an opportunity for entrepreneurs to be part of things like the B Corporation movement as well. But at the same time, we now have regulation appearing on the horizon from the EU and also from US, for instance, in California as well, around AI. So the impact of AI and regulation around that, especially for around safety. Do you feel that that we are living in a increasingly complex and a difficult environment for entrepreneurs in terms of things like compliance, environmental impact? What are the ways that you think that some of these organizations and perhaps your own could make it almost drag and drop simpler for entrepreneurs to benchmark themselves or to to hit KPIs on the kinds of impact measurements that you're talking about?
Okay, so wonderful question, Mike. So every one of you listening to Mike and my conversation today can go to the IFVI global data set and download on your PC at no cost. It's open source. Over 100,000 environmental value factors that cover 430 impacts across the world and across 268 GPS locations. So a cubic meter of water has a different value in sub-Saharan Africa or in Abu Dhabi than it does in Manhattan or in London. This enables us for the first time to take tons of carbon, liters of water, acres of eroded soil, tons of waste, and turn them into dollars and cents or any other currency. By doing that, we bring impacts into financial analysis. You can look at the profit of a company after its impact. Take Danone. Danone, when I wrote my book about 4 years ago, was making €5 billion of profit. But the health impact it was having because of the high sugar content in its product was minus $8 billion. And so all of a sudden, you begin to compare Danone with Nestle and with Unilever and with Associated British Foods. And investors are very aware that consumer preferences are being affected now by the social and environmental impacts. That's why we have 30 to 40 trillion dollars of ESG investment in the world today. So what the IFVI is doing is it's showing how our world is going to integrate impacts into accounting. And it's very similar, Mike, to the situation before GAAP accounting, generally accepted accounting principles, came in 1933 and 34. Would you believe that at that time, after the crash of 1929 in the United States, investors began to realize that they'd been investing in companies that picked their own accounting policies, had no auditors, could put into special reserves part of their profit without telling shareholders. So basically, investing in companies without understanding what profit they were making.
They were marking their own homework, I guess.
Exactly.
Right.
And then you got in standardization in the form of GAAP accounting in the United States. And at the time, people said this will be the end of capitalism in the United States if anybody can actually make GAAP accounting work. Well, today, we know that without the assurance we get from audited accounts, there wouldn't be a financial market of 250 trillion or so. Same is going to happen with impact. We have 30 to 40 trillion of ESG investment going into companies to achieve impacts that are not measured. And it's creating big backlash, as you know, Mike, because of green washing. And so we're now seeing the similar type of move, the similar standardization that GAAP brought, but this time it's coming to the impact of company. We're now creating generally accepted impact principles.
Are you concerned that the bonfire of regulations, which is being mooted by the president-elect Donald Trump, that he is going to sweep away whole departments, sweep away regulation? Are you concerned that in the future that could lead to another 1929 crash?
I'm not sure it'll lead to a 29 crash, but it won't stop the progress of impact for a simple reason. It's simply a better way to make money now. Doing good and doing well is a better way to grow faster and to make more money. And impact accounting is a tool to help companies and investors understand what impacts are they creating, because if we introduce a carbon tax, as is very likely to happen, or a sugar tax, or if we introduce tax credits for ethnic and gender diversity, it's going to affect the bottom line of companies and therefore their value. And if consumers begin to use apps like the French app Yuka, which is used by more than 22 million people in France and more than 15 million, I think, now in the United States, when they shop, scanning the barcode, finding out whether the product is good for your health or not, and whether there's a better alternative. These apps are going to include environmental and social impacts too. If you're going to buy a tea bag and you like Twinings, and you put your phone on the barcode of the box, you're going to find out Associated British Foods made 1.5 billion pounds of profit and created 1.8 billion pounds of environmental damage. Well, maybe you'll go to Lipton, which is provided by Unilever or somebody else with better impacts as well.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm afraid we're out of time, but that is a fantastic way to end the conversation. Ultimately, it doesn't really. I think what you're trying to say, if you'll allow me, is that it doesn't really matter in many ways what happens, especially amongst our leaders and politicians. That people themselves, consumers themselves, ultimately want to buy products which are doing good in the world, which are creating impact, which are environmentally friendly, which are healthy as well. And that's a great reminder, actually, that we can actually be part of that solution. Ladies and gentlemen, I really want to, I hope you can give a round of applause that he can hear from where he is. Sir Ronald Cohen, President of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment and the Portland Trust. Thank you so much for joining us today at XPANSE.
Great pleasure to be with you all. Good luck.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. See you later. Have a good conference.